Good morning, everyone, and Happy New Year. To kick off 2022, I thought it would be fun to do a recap of sorts of my favorite vegetable, annual flower, and herb varieties from this past growing season, so the 2021 gardening season, from my Zone 6A Ohio garden. Now, I did a little poll a couple weeks ago asking if you all would be interested in this kind of video and if you'd rather see all of them or just a small portion, and an overwhelming majority of folks said they wanted to see all of them. So that's what I'm going to give you. I am warning you, it is a lot of varieties. So I am taking one very smart viewer's suggestion and breaking this up into a series of videos where I will talk about the varieties by season. So today I'm just going to talk about my favorites from my cool season spring planted crops, and then I'm probably going to break up the warm season crops into an early and late summer, and then I'll have a fall. I think that's how it's going to go. It'll be similar to that at any rate. Now, one of the requests that I had for these videos was that I provide sources for each of the varieties that I mentioned, and I will do that. The caveat being that I am a trial seed manager by trade. So what that means is basically I am getting new varieties from breeders and seed companies all over the world, sometimes before they're released to the general market. So there's going to be a few things that I might mention that there are not sources for the home gardener yet, but these are varieties that you will very likely see popping up in seed catalogs over the next couple of years. So there may be just something to keep in mind for the future. And I will call those out specifically when I mention them, but most of these are available from your typical seed companies. So places like Johnny Seed or Gurney Seed and Nursery Company or Burpee Seed Company, those types of retailers. I also wanted to mention that these are favorites that I grew specifically in the 2021 garden. So if you don't hear a certain crop type or vegetable type mentioned in my listings here, I keep logs of my favorites going back for years and years and years. So if you're curious about a specific suggestion, feel free to contact me, and I'm happy to share favorites that I've grown in the past as well. And one last note before we jump in, I did want to mention that seed varieties tend to be at least somewhat regionally adapted, meaning that what grows well for me here in Ohio in Zone 6A is not necessarily going to do well for someone in the Deep South or the Pacific Northwest or even the far Northeast. We are all dealing with different little microclimates and different pest and disease pressures. So while these suggestions may be a jumping off point for you, I highly recommend, if you are in a significantly different growing area than me, talking to local growers about what their favorites are. Now, I have seen firsthand how this can happen and how disappointing it can be. For my job, I travel to vegetable trials all over the country, sometimes in other countries, and there are always a lot of breeding trials done out in California, specifically the Salinas Valley area of California. And the first couple of years that I visited those trials, I was blown away, in particular by the tomatoes, because they were growing these incredible, huge, delicious, disease-free varieties. And I was like, give me all of them. I have to grow these. Well, I brought them back to Ohio, and some of you savvy gardeners may well guess what happened. I put them in my Ohio climate, in my Ohio soil, with my Ohio pest and disease pressures, and they were some of the most rotten, disgusting, poor performing tomatoes I'd ever had in my garden. And it wasn't a fault of the variety, it's just that those tomatoes were bred and selected for growing in California, not in the Midwest. So without further ado, let's jump into my 2021 spring cool season favorites. I'm going to start with lettuce because it's usually one of the first crops that are ready for harvest in the spring. And a favorite this year was a variety called Red Velvet. Seed is available from Gurney Seed and Nursery Company. And what blew me away about this particular variety is that it was stunningly gorgeous. I'm actually planning on incorporating it into some of my more floral ornamental plantings this coming year, but also that it overwintered in my garden with no protection whatsoever. So I did not have these plants covered. I had some planted actually last fall, so fall of 2020. Thought they were dead. They looked completely frozen back. Come about the end of March, early April, the plants started sprouting back with new growth. And by mid to late April, early May, they were full and lush and completely gorgeous again. Now, lettuce is notoriously cold hardy, but this is the first time I've had lettuce make it all the way through the winter without being covered with a row cover, high tunnel, or something like that, and sprout back and regrow in the spring. So that was a really exciting find for me. The next variety was a romaine type called Zalbadora. I think I'm pronouncing that right. It's available from Johnny's Seed. And I am a romaine lettuce fanatic. It is far and away my favorite type of lettuce to grow. So every year I'm looking at new varieties. And I'm always putting them up against my old standard, which is winter density. It's an old variety, but it's still one of the best romaines that I've grown. And Zalbadora was very, very similar to winter density. It actually seemed to do a little bit better once the weather got warmer. But what I like is that they make these compact, really dense, beautiful apple green heads, and they are sweet and crunchy, but with a really nice peppery flavor. Winter density is very mild. I found that Zalbadora had more of that peppery goodness that's really nice for like a good Caesar salad. The next one I wanted to mention is actually an entire series of lettuce. It is a series called the Easy Leaf Lettuce series, and Harris Seeds offers some of the individual varieties for sale. Gurney Seed sells a mix. And if you have ever grown Salanova from Johnny's, you may be familiar with this concept. And what this is a one-cut lettuce. So these are bred to be kind of mini or baby heads, and you can harvest either by snipping off at ground level, and then you end up with this nice little baby full head of lettuce, or you can snip them up a little higher on the stem. And what will happen is with one snip, the whole head falls apart and you basically have an instant salad. Because the leaves are small, baby leaf size, you don't have to do any other prep work. You don't have to chop or shred your leaves for a salad, and it's really, really handy. You can also plant a whole bunch of these in a really compact space. So if you're growing in a container or you just have a tiny corner of a raised bed, you can tuck a lot of these little heads in. They're also just beautiful because they come in an entire range of leaf textures and colors, everywhere from like a lime green down to the deepest burgundy. So it's a really beautiful series of lettuce. And the last lettuce variety is an old variety. It was actually introduced in 1947, and it is called Bronze Beauty. Sometimes you'll also see it called Bronze Arrowhead, and Gurney Seed lists this one. It's got a really unique, truly an arrowhead type leaf shape, and it makes this really nice big head. But this one for me is all about eating quality. It's substantial, it's sweet, it's crisp, and it's just a super easy one to grow. Another super early spring crop are radishes. And if you follow along with me on Instagram or Facebook, you may have seen some of my posts asking folks for suggestions about how to best prepare radishes. They are a crop that I grow every year and I don't love. I have tried and tried and tried and tried to get myself to love radishes as much as I love all my other vegetables, and I just don't. But it's getting better because I have found some varieties through the years that are definitely heads above others in terms of eating quality. And the variety that I grew this year was no exception. It is a variety called Roatan, and it is from Bejo Seed. Now this is one, like I mentioned in the beginning, that is not readily available for the general market yet. But I look for it to be in coming years. And in the meantime, there is another variety called Rivoli, which is very, very similar to Roatan and is available from Gurney Seed amongst other places. But what I liked about Roatan and also about Rivoli is the eating quality. So these varieties have very, very fine grained, crisp, juicy flesh, the kind where you bite into it and it's just kind of like popping crisp. They're also quite sweet with just a small amount of peppery flavor, and they don't tend to get that incredibly cloying hot intensity that some radishes do. And they're also very, very slow to get pithy or woody, unlike some of the other radishes I've grown in the past. So if you, like me, are not a lover of radishes, I highly suggest giving Roatan or Rivoli a try before you write them off for good. Also, as an aside, I always thought that my grandparents were crazy because I heard them talk about eating radishes with butter, but in my quest to find a way to eat radishes that I actually enjoyed, I finally just gave in and tried it. It's amazing. And so I just sliced these radishes, put a small sliver of really good like Kerrygold salted butter on top, and then did another little sprinkle of sea salt. It's excellent. Now I'm going to mention one broccoli. I will talk about a few other broccoli varieties in the fall segment. I wanted to mention this one here because I've grown it for, I think again, about 3 or 4 years, both in the spring and the fall, and it's been beautifully successful in both seasons. And this is a variety called Burgundy sprouting broccoli, not to be confused with other purple sprouting broccolis. And this one's available from Gurney's Seed. Now, over the course of the last 15 or so years, I've tried a lot of different purple sprouting broccoli types. And what I have found is that here in my climate, they have not done well. A lot of purple sprouting types are bred for a slightly different climate than mine, where you would be planting in the fall, overwintering, and then harvesting in the spring. I've had a few varieties that I've been able to marginally overwinter here, but even when I get some sprout production in the spring, it's very limited and the eating quality is terrible. I've also tried planting in the early spring to get an early summer harvest, and if I get any sprouts at all, same thing, they've been atrociously bitter and basically inedible. And I was ready to throw in the towel and give up on purple sprouting broccoli, and along came this variety, Burgundy, and it has, basically it's one of my favorite all-time broccolis of any type, heading, sprouting, all of it. And it's because it is such an easy to grow, delicious variety. I can plant this one on the same schedule as all of my other brassicas, so starting from seed in February, harvesting in about June, or starting from seed in mid-July and harvesting in October. And the beauty of these sprouting types is that you get a smaller kind of main head that you cut off, but then you get this extended production because the plant, as long as the weather cooperates and stays relatively cool, just keeps putting on side shoots. So you're able to harvest and harvest and harvest. And obviously the florets, the pretty little purple florets, are edible, but also the stem itself is quite sweet and tender. So unlike a traditional heading broccoli where you might be able to use some of that stem, but you usually end up having to peel the skin off and do all this extra work, and then it gets woody pretty quickly. These stems are nice and tender and sweet and require no peeling. So more of the plant itself is actually edible. So I end up getting a larger total yield off of Burgundy than I do any of my other broccoli plants. So this is one that I will grow probably forever here in my garden. Now, similar to broccoli, I have to mention cauliflower. Now, cauliflower is not the easiest crop for me to grow here in Ohio. It's notoriously finicky about its growing conditions. Typically, our temperature fluctuations and weather fluctuations cause too much stress, and that can cause issues with the cauliflower either bolting or buttoning. I also have issues because our springs are often too short and it will kind of just jump right into the heat of summer, and cauliflower does not like that either. So when I do find varieties that I can successfully grow here, I'm really excited to share them. And what I typically look for are very early maturing varieties and varieties that are tolerant to stress. And I had some really great successes this year. Now, the first one I want to share is a variety called Loosehead 65, and this is from Pure Line Seeds. This is unfortunately not one that is available on the open market yet, but Song from Johnny's seed is very, very similar. I grew them both side by side this year. These are a unique type. You'll see them referred to as loose head or sweet stem cauliflowers. And basically they're not gonna form like a tight, compact head of cauliflower like you may be used to. These have a little bit longer stem and the curd tends to be a little bit looser. But much like the sprouting broccoli, the stem on these is sweet and tender and just as edible as the white curd part. What I really liked about Loose Head 65 and about Song is they're very, very early maturing. They also tend to put up with stress better than your typical heading cauliflower. The swings in temperature don't seem to bother them. The heat didn't bother them as much as it does my typical cauliflower. I just found that in general, these types were much easier to grow than probably any cauliflower varieties I've tried in the past. And they did well in the spring and in the fall. Now, when I start looking at the traditional type of heading cauliflower, again, looking at very, very early maturing varieties, this year I had great results with a variety called Bermeo. That one's available from Fedco Seeds, and Adana, which is available from Territorial Seeds. Now, both of these varieties are mature in about the 65 to 70-ish days from transplant. So I transplanted these out in early April and both were harvested right around the 3rd week of June. Now, typically by that point in the summer, we're in the mid 80s and we're really getting less and less rainfall. So at times it can be quite dry. And both Bermeo and Adana seem to hold up to that heat and not drought, but lack of rainfall pressure quite well. It did not affect the quality. I still got nice big heads. They were sweet, they were tender, they didn't get bitter, and they didn't show any of those signs that a cauliflower will typically show when it's under stress. So I highly recommend those if you've been trying for cauliflower and have not had good luck. And finally, I do like to grow a colored cauliflower or two every year. And this year I grew Clementine, which is an orange-headed variety. Now in the past, I've grown Flame Star and I've grown Cheddar, which are two other orange-headed varieties. And Clementine has been my favorite of any orange-headed type that I've grown. Now it's a longer maturity. I was harvesting this one about the 1st week of July, which is getting pretty dicey for me because it gets really hot and dry in July. But it was a beautiful plant, a beautiful head, nice vibrant orange coloration, a really nice nutty flavor, and it had a big strong plant that offered a lot of coverage, so I wasn't getting sunburn on my heads of cauliflower, and I did not have to blanch or tie those leaves up. It's kind of a self-blanching type. But for my spring planted cabbage, this is a variety that I grow every single year without fail. I grow it in the fall too, but it does really, really well in early spring plantings. This is a variety called Tiara. It is available from Johnny's Seed. And you may have seen me rave about this one in an older video, which if you get a chance, check it out. But in summary, I love Tiara because it is super early, it's super reliable and easy to grow, and I've yet to grow a cabbage yet that has better eating quality for fresh use. So if you like to shred up cabbage in salads or do a lightly dressed coleslaw, basically any application where you're using it raw or very lightly cooked, I don't think you can beat Tiara in terms of quality. Now I usually do a planting of a larger, later maturing cabbage for things like sauerkraut, but Tiara is one that goes in my garden every single year. So of course I have to also mention my cool season, super hardy annual flowers. And what spring garden would be complete without pansies? Now I've tried a lot of different pansy varieties. The one that I always go back to is Swiss Giants. It's an old heirloom. I typically just grow the Swiss Giants mix, but man, is it ever reliable. And the beauty of these pansies are, despite their pretty little delicate appearance, they are incredibly cold tolerant. They are out there blooming when nothing else wants to show its face, and they readily self-sow. So they will drop seeds and pop up on their own the next season. Out in my current garden, I started seeds indoors, planted out my transplants 3 years ago, and I have not had to plant pansies since. They pop up on their own every single year. And it's just wonderful to have that flush of color so early in the season. Another cold tolerant superstar is calendula. Now I grow calendula both as an herb and a flower, and I typically rely on a variety called Resina for my herbal usage. This year I grew a new mix called Remembrance from Fruition Seeds, and growing this one just for beautification purposes, and it did not disappoint. Again, incredibly cold hardy. I've had calendula bloom in the snow. It self-sows, and the Remembrance mix in particular has this really beautiful variation of flower shapes and all these different tones of orange, from vibrant gold orange to kind of a pastel orange sherbet color, rusts and creams. It's just a really beautiful flower. And not only do I get to appreciate that early season bloom when there's little else going on, but it's fantastic in that it provides early and late season forage for things like bees when there's not a whole lot else for them to pick from. Lots of onions this year. I had 11 bulb onion varieties in trial this year, and out of those 11, I found a couple of favorites sort of for each different usage. So first I wanted to mention overwintered onions. Last year was the first year that I tried or harvested overwintered onions. So these I started in the fall of 2020, harvested early spring of 21, and the variety that I grew last year is a variety called Winteria, and it is from a Hungarian company called Simo. Again, not readily available yet. I'm hoping that one makes it stateside sometime soon, but I'm actually expanding on my overwintered onion planting this year, and I'm trialing several varieties that are more readily available from places like Johnny's and Territorial and High Mowing Seeds, and that includes varieties like Bridger, Keepsake, and Desert Sunrise, and I will give an update on how that trial goes. But I really liked Winteria, and what was really exciting was to have full-size onions ready for harvest weeks earlier than what my spring planted onions were. Now for my spring planted varieties, I really liked Red Torpedo Tropea this year from Dixondale Farms. This lovely onion is an heirloom variety from the Calabria region of Italy, and according to what I read, the onions that they grow there are so big and sweet and delicious that you can eat them just like an apple. Now that was not the experience that I had here, and I'm putting that up to the regional adaptability. So my growing conditions here are much different than what they have in most of Italy. And it did get quite hot and dry toward the end of the growing season, which will lead to a stronger onion. I found that they did have a good amount of pungency. They also had high sugars, but I love this one because it was just a beautiful onion. These produced these big, rosy colored, elongated onions that were really nice for slicing up. That shape is really easy to work with versus a round onion. And they cooked up beautifully. So they really caramelized nicely because of that high sugar content. Another heirloom that is on repeat for me is a Scottish variety called Ailsa Craig. And this one is notorious because of its size. Ailsa Craig, if fed and cared for properly, supposedly can reach a size of up to 6 pounds. Now I did not reach that 6 pound mark, but I had quite a few that were close to 2 pounds, and that was without any real special feeding or treatment of any kind. Now, Ailsa Craig is excellent for fresh eating. It's, think of it more like if you're familiar with candy, with that type of onion that you would use more for fresh usage. It does not store well. Most of mine were sprouted or mush by about 4 or 5 months into storage, but it's a great fresh eating variety, and it's just a lot of fun to grow something that big. And then my go-tos for long storage. These are 2 varieties that I grow every single year. Patterson onion is a yellow for storage, and Red Zeppelin is a red for storage. Now, properly cured and stored, I've had Patterson last over a year, and Red Zeppelin usually is right at around 10 to 12 months. Now, these are more of a pungent type, not my top pick for fresh eating, but they're excellent cooked, which is how I use most of my onions anyway. Now, of course, no spring garden would be complete without peas, and I had a couple favorites from this year in that category. The first I wanted to mention is Magnolia Blossom from Gurney's Seed, and this is a sugar snap pole type pea. So the plants get quite tall, like well over 5 feet. So definitely if you grow this one, give it a good tall support. What I loved is the appearance of this one. So again, this is one of those vegetables that could double as an ornamental. It puts on loads of these beautiful bicolor blossoms in the late spring. It also has a really interesting foliage type referred to sometimes as tendril peas or semi-aphylla, which basically means that instead of just putting on regular leaves all over, it puts on these super curly-cued little tendrily things that are edible. You can pick those when they're young and steam them, but they also lend this really beautiful, delicate appearance to the plant. And the peas themselves are great. This one will develop a string if it gets on the over mature side, so you definitely want to pick them young. But they're sweet and crisp and a pretty typical sugar snap pea. Very, very high yields. The next variety is a standard shell pea, and this is a new variety called Dancer. This one is from Pure Line Seeds. It's not widely available yet, but I do look for that one to become more readily available in the next couple years because it's a really great variety. Now, this is a bit more of a compact plant. Mine grew to about 3 feet. I was easily able to support these on a low fence. It's a beautiful, compact, deep blue-green plant, but what I really liked about Dancer is that it has a high set of pods per node, so you're getting 3 to 4 pods on each little growth end versus your typical 1 to 2 on a standard shell pea, and it sets them all up near the top of the plant. So it's super quick and easy to pick this one, which for me is a big deal because picking things like peas and beans can get a little bit tedious, especially when you have a lot of them to pick. So when all the pods are set all right kind of together, it makes the job so much quicker. In addition to that, these are nice sized pods. They've got a lot of peas per pod, and it has a really great sweet taste. And then finally, another long-standing favorite of mine is Mira green pea. This is another shell pea. This one is more of a pole type, so it needs a little bit more of a support. Not quite as tall as Magnolia Blossom, but easily 5 feet. This one I like for the extended harvest. So it continues to set pods for a good amount of time into the summer. So I'm typically harvesting my Mira green for weeks after my other pea varieties are done. It also tends to put up with the heat better, meaning that it continues to produce and the peas themselves do not turn starchy and bitter as quickly as a lot of my other varieties do. It's a really nice flavored, really sweet pea. I highly recommend Mira green. Now, carrots are a typical spring planted crop that I honestly struggle with quite a bit. This is one of those crops that I'm still working on mastering. My biggest issue here is my soil. So my native soil is heavy clay, which carrots don't like. But even in the beds that I have built specifically for carrots, so this year I did kind of a double-decker raised bed. I filled it with sandy topsoil and mushroom compost. Even that was a little bit heavy for the carrots that I was growing. So I continue to work on that, but in the meantime, I really look for varieties that can put up with the heavier soil. So I cannot grow an Imperator type to save my life. Imperator carrots, you may see in the grocery store. They're very, very long, they're thin, they're very delicate. I grew about 5 different varieties this year in my new bed, hoping that they would do better, and it was a disaster. They were snapping off in the soil, they were all crooked and wonky. It was horrible. So I stick to varieties that are better suited to heavy soil types. And the good news is I had some clear winners this year. The first variety was Berlin carrot from Gurney's Seed, and I liked Berlin because it really put on these nice chunky roots. So that thicker, chunkier root type tends to power down through heavy soil better than a thinner root. And the nice thing about Berlin is I harvested mine early, so they were about 6 inches long and about that big around at the top. They can get much, much bigger and still remain sweet and tender. I had to get mine out because I needed the bed, but these had excellent crunch, good sugars, and just a little bit of that carroty bitterness, for lack of better terms, but in a good way that gives the flavor a little bit of complexity. So I really liked the flavor on these. The second variety was my kids' flavor favorite, and this is a variety called Adana, available from Johnny's Seed. And it is a bunching type carrot. So these typically would be harvested on the small side. And if you saw them sold at a farmer's market or in the grocery, they'd be sold in a bunch. My kids liked this one because it was super sweet. It had no bitterness whatsoever, no real like carroty flavor, and a really nice crisp crunch. So this is the one that I would catch them out in the garden pulling out of the ground and eating. And then my other big carrot success story is a variety called Envy, available from Gurney's Seed. And because I struggle with carrots, rarely do I get to pull a beautiful, long, perfect looking carrot out of my soil. And growing Envy was the closest that I have come to that experience. So this was a nice big root, kind of that classically tapered carrot shape. So when I pulled these out of the ground, I was honestly, I was tickled. And I was like, oh, these are going to taste terrible because they look so good. And surprisingly, this was one of the best flavored carrots in my spring trials. Again, really high sugars, really nice crisp crunch, and a good amount of carroty aftertaste to give some complexity to the flavor. I had a lot of potatoes this year, and I had 6 varieties that were new to me that I planted. Out of those, 2 really stood out. The first was Baltic Rose. I got this one and the next one from the Maine potato lady. Baltic Rose I really liked because it was a very high yielder, not the biggest spuds, but all the spuds were really nice size. So you'll get some varieties that will throw a great big one and then you'll have a bunch of little tiny ones, and I find that really annoying. So Baltic Rose had a lot of potatoes that were all kind of about this size. A really beautiful raspberry pink thin skin and bright gold flesh, and just an overall excellent eating quality. This one was really good for like boiling if you're going to do potato salad, also good roasted, baked, and fried. Just a really nice performer overall. The second variety, which I hope I'm pronouncing right, is Lehi or Lehigh. This was a 2007 introduction, and it was a joint release from Cornell University, the University of Pennsylvania, and the University of Maine. And it's named after the Lehigh Valley or Lehi Valley in Pennsylvania, where a lot of the trials were conducted. It did really, really well for me in Ohio as well. This was probably the second biggest variety in my trials. Again, a lot of nice size ones. It did not throw many tiny spuds at all. Very healthy plants, seemed to be quite disease resistant, and I had very, very high yields off of this one. The other thing that I liked is this is a great store. So it will sit in storage for a long time without sprouting. And the long storage is a big deal for me because I typically do one planting of potatoes in the spring, and then I will store those spuds into the winter. So I'm always looking for long storing varieties. Excellent eating quality overall. And this one is what they call kind of a multi-use. So it's good for pretty much anything you would want to use a potato for. And lastly, this is again one of my long-term, long-standing favorites. Purple Viking potato from Gurney's Seed and Nursery Company. Of any variety of vegetable that I grow in my garden, I probably have grown Purple Viking the most reliably for the most number of years of anything I've ever done. It's just a beautiful, wonderful potato. You might think it's weird for someone to get so excited about potatoes, but truly grow it, try it. I think it will change your life. It will change your life. It is by far the most reliably good producing potato variety that I have grown. So I can always count on this one to put on a high yield of big spuds. It's a beautiful potato, pink and purple skin with white flesh, and it is the best eating potato that I've ever tried. Now, to qualify that statement, one of the things that I often have to do are taste testing trials, which entails getting anywhere from 5 to 20, sometimes more varieties of a thing, say potatoes or radishes or green beans, sitting down tasting every single one of them and making tasting evaluation notes. And potatoes were one of the first taste testing trials that I ever had to do. And going into this, I thought, what many of you might think is that, like, a potato is a potato. How much different can they possibly be? And while it was not as exciting as doing like an apple taste test, it was quite an eye-opening experience, because what I found is that potatoes can actually be quite different. There are differences in texture, there are differences in flavor. Definitely different types are better suited for different cooking purposes. Purple Viking was a standout winner from that taste testing trial that I had to do 15 years ago. And I've been growing and trialing different potatoes ever since, and I've yet to find a better tasting one. Again, Purple Viking can be used for almost any use. Here lately, because I have a lot of spuds in my basement that are just now starting to sprout. So my Purple Vikings were harvested, I want to say the end of June, and it is now January, and they're still holding up pretty well in storage. I'm using a lot of them for mashed potatoes. I'm not a big mashed potato fan, but these are the best mashed potatoes I've ever eaten. I will quit now raving about Purple Viking and just encourage you, if you're a potato grower or if you wanted to try growing potatoes, please put that on your list for this year's garden and let me know what you think if you do grow them. Now, another crop that's a little bit finicky and difficult to grow in my area is bulb fennel. Bulb fennel is tricky, kind of in the same way that cauliflower is tricky, in that it is a cool season crop, but it's not super cold tolerant, and it's very easily stressed by drastic temperature swings. Also, day length and hot temperatures will make fennel bolt. So in my area, I have better luck with the Zephyrino types. And this year I had really good results with a variety called Dragon from Johnny's. And with my bulb fennel, what I'm typically doing is transplanting out in early April, and then I will keep those covered with a row cover, usually until the danger of frost has passed, just to play it safe. That's what I did with Dragon. It did really, really well for me. And in the past, I've also had really good results with varieties called Orion and Preludio, and those have been very, very similar to Dragon. My standard cool season herbs that I grow every year are dill and cilantro. The variety of dill I tried this year is a variety called Hanek from a Hungarian company called Simo Seeds. Again, one of those that's not widely available yet, but I'm hoping this one comes to market soon, because I've discovered in talking with the seed folks there at Simo that in Hungary they are really serious about their dill. And what I appreciated about this one is the intensity of the flavor. So what they are breeding for is a higher volatile oil content in the herb, which makes that dill flavor incredibly pungent. And I love my dill, so this was an absolute winner for me. I also really liked that the plants were super compact and bushy and a really beautiful deep blue-green. Now, another dill that I grew, and I grow nearly every year, is a well-known variety called Mammoth. And this is available many places, including Fedco Seeds. I actually grow Mammoth for a different reason, where I'm growing Hanek for snipping the fresh tender greens. I'm typically using Mammoth more for the flower heads and for the seeds, and I'm using those to put in my homemade pickles. I also like Mammoth because dill is a really great plant to grow for pollinators. In particular, it's a plant that the swallowtail butterflies feed off of. So I can grow lots and lots of Mammoth dill and let the caterpillars feed to their heart's content, and they're really not going to do a whole lot to my other dill that I'm growing for culinary usage. For cilantro, I grew a variety called Standby from Adaptive Seeds. Again, I'm a lover of cilantro. I know that's one of those very polarizing herbs where I feel like you either love it or you hate it. If you love cilantro and you can't get enough, give Standby a try because it has a very, very intense flavor. It's also very slow to bolt, and it's very, very cold tolerant. Now, that's true of most cilantro, but this one has overwintered for me here really, really well. And finally, I wanted to mention celery. Now, celery is a bit of a longer season crop for me, but I do plant it out in the spring. Celery, I find, is relatively easy for me to grow here. The problem that I have with it is that it is not easy to get a nice, big, juicy, non-fibrous stalk of celery. A lot of what I've grown in the past has performed really well, but when I go to eat the stalks, they're so fibrous, so stringy that I don't even bother. Basically end up feeding them all to the chickens. So I was really pleased with the Kelvin variety from Johnny's that I grew this year because it was easy to grow. Just keep in mind that celery is a heavy feeder and likes a lot of water, and you'll pretty much have success with it. But Kelvin produces nice, big, chunky stalks that are very low fiber, so they're very crisp. They don't have like a lot of that stringiness. They're very juicy. They're sweet, but they also have an actual flavor. So they actually have an intense celery flavor. They're not just like the bland, essentially flavorless celery that you get from the grocery store. So give Kelvin a try if you are a fan of celery. So those were my favorites from the 2021 spring garden here in Ohio in Zone 6A. I know it was a lot. If you stuck through to this point, thank you. But keep in mind that that was barely even a quarter of the total that I had planted. So I really cut that list back. And if you found this interesting, be sure to subscribe and stay tuned because I plan to follow up, as I mentioned, with my summer and fall favorites. And if you have a favorite variety or varieties that you think I should grow in this year's garden, please drop a line in the comments below and let me know. I love trying out new varieties and I love hearing suggestions from other gardeners. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.